Hi, let's talk about appealing to an audience's emotions when you write. As I said above, this can be a really effective strategy depending on the type of assignment that you have to do. So using emotion is referred to as pathos or pathos. You can think about that root path, like sympathy, or sociopath is somebody who has no emotions about what they do, right? So that root path has to do with emotion. You guys have done a textual analysis, and a lot of you opted to do commercials. So commercials are probably the best example of using pathos in order to persuade. Most of the time, they're not appealing to your logic. They're relying on you feeling something and that being the motivation to buy some product, right? I mean, realistically, how different is Axe body spray from regular old soap, right? They're using these images to try to conjure up some emotional connection and using that to get you to buy some product, right? I always think about these Sarah McLachlan ASPCA commercials where there's like a dog who has a single tear running down his face, right? And a lot of times I think about, how this is sort of an issue when it comes to using emotion. I do, in some sense, think those Sarah McLachlan commercials are effective because they do make pretty much everybody feel something. But I also sort of wonder whether it's too much, because I don't know if you're like me. A lot of times when I see those commercials, I immediately change the channel because I don't want to deal with that, right? And the thing is, if that's what a lot of audience members are doing, then that commercial is not really achieving its purpose, right? They're trying to get you to donate money to an organization because you feel bad and sympathetic about what you see, right? If everybody just changes the channel, then that's maybe not an effective strategy. So it brings up an issue with using emotion in general, which is this is something that works best if you keep it to a minimum. If you go overboard, that's when you get into trouble. And specifically with writing, using emotion to persuade works best in combination with logic, not something that's, overburdened with emotion, right? So let's take an example. Let's say I'm trying to persuade my boss to give me a raise, right? Let's say I'm only using emotional appeals in order to try to do that. I'll say things like, I'm just so tired and I work so hard and nobody appreciates me and blah, 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 blah. If I use too much of that emotional language, it just comes off as whining, right? A lot of times, sort of like my concern about the Sarah McLachlan commercial is, as an audience, if we hear too much of that, we shut down, right? The message just gets cut off and, we sort of turn the other cheek, right? But let's take that same example and imagine that I used logic sort of in combination, right? I really love this job and I want to do my best, and I've been a loyal employee for a long time. Here are all of my accomplishments. I come to work on time every day. Here's what I've contributed to the organization. Like, if I'm giving reasons alongside how I feel, then that's going to be a lot more convincing, right? Most audiences need to hear some sort of logical reasoning alongside that emotion in order to really be persuaded. So the point is that the amount of emotional appeals that you use when you write, it sort of depends on the genre. For some genres, it's going to be more appropriate than others, right? I think, take an example like a general research paper, right? Maybe like the report that you guys are just finishing up or just have finished up. In that sort of genre, using emotional appeals is not relevant, right? You're not trying to persuade. You're not trying to give your personal experience. The point is only to report information from other people, right? So it's not really necessary to include any of these things trying to convince the audience through emotion. Whereas this new argument essay that you guys are going to be starting, I think emotion can be relevant, but like we said, it has to be kept to a minimum, and it has to kind of be in combination with some of these other strategies. It doesn't work well on its own. So I just wanted to give you a couple examples of things not to do and things to do, right? So I wrote two separate paragraphs, one significantly longer than the other. Scroll down here. To kind of show you what happens when you rely just on emotion when you write versus when you try to incorporate emotion but combine it with other sorts of strategies, okay? So I took sort of this issue that's, on a lot of people's minds right now about whether schools should have in-person classes this fall. So this top one, this is an example of what I would not do. So let me read it first, and I'll explain. Those insisting students attend classes in person this fall are potentially murderers. Imagine a young person you love catching COVID-19. Imagine sitting by and watching their health deteriorate before your eyes as they gasp for breath. Think about how you'd feel watching your loved one go through the painful process of being put on a ventilator, barely able to function as a human. How will you feel when they're choking on their last breath, looking you in the eyes as if to say, why? Shame on you if you support forcing innocent children to attend school during this pandemic. The deadly consequences will be on your conscience. So, as you could probably tell, this is a bit much, or a lot, when it comes to emotion, right? One problem is seemingly I'm attacking anybody who disagrees with me, right? And as I said earlier, that's not usually an effective tactic. You're going to read more about this further down in the learning activity when it comes to logical fallacies. But again, believing that sending students to in-person classes this fall, that doesn't make you a murderer, right? There's a difference there, isn't it? Again, like all this stuff about imagining how would you feel if you knew somebody like this, and like just giving several obvious sort of manipulative tactics here to try to make somebody feel guilty, right? Again, in the end, I come out and say, shame on you if you believe this. This is going to be on your conscience. Just shame in general is not a great tactic when you're trying to persuade somebody, right? Again, this is why I bring up that Sarah McLachlan commercial, because isn't that sort of the main strategy they're using there? They're trying to make you feel bad if you're not giving money to help these poor, sick animals, right? And I just wonder, does that make people really donate money, or do they just feel bad and move on with their day, right? So I don't know. The point is this top paragraph is kind of more of an attack, and it might make the audience feel something, but maybe not even the emotion that I'm trying to make them feel, right? Probably if I read this in somebody's paper, I would feel resentful, annoyed that someone's trying to shame me. Again, if I felt this way, right? So that's it. Doing something like this top paragraph, it's not going to work for an argumentative essay, right? That essay, as I said earlier in the learning activity, it has to include these kind of building blocks of argument, right? You making a claim, giving reasons why you feel the way that you do, and then including actual evidence to support those reasons that you gave, right? Or to illustrate what you mean. So I typed up another paragraph at the bottom here, and this one, I think, kind of combines some emotional stuff alongside logic, right? And I think that as I read it, you'll see it sounds better and maybe more persuasive than the one above. While people are right to be concerned about students falling behind in their education during this pandemic, Forcing students to attend in-person classes in the fall could make the COVID crisis last much longer than it has to, and result in more deaths than there have to be. Many of us know someone who's suffered a loss due to the coronavirus. I, for one, know a person who has lost 3 family members to the disease. Beyond the tragic deaths occurring, nearly all of us are mourning the loss of our normal way of life, confined to our homes, hiding our faces, and lacking social interaction. As much as we all desire to get back to normal, pushing schools to open prematurely will not speed up this process, but instead set us back. The New York Times just published the results of a large study conducted in South Korea, one of the first countries to deal with COVID-19, which revealed that while children younger than 10 do transmit the disease less than adults, the risk is not 0. And those between the ages of 10 and 19 spread the disease as well as adults do. Though online learning is not always ideal, this seems the safer option for schools this year if we want to minimize the damage done by this unpredictable virus. So, as you can see, this one is not attacking anybody. It's not trying to shame people. It's more so saying, here's how I feel about this, and here's why. It does, though, contain some emotional appeals, right? This part here about, knowing people who suffered from coronavirus. This part about sort of feeling bad about losing our normal way of life, all that stuff. I'm doing those things here because I'm trying to show the audience I understand how you feel, right? I understand the pain caused by this virus and how we all just wish things could be normal again. Anything where you're trying to identify with the audience or show that you understand in some way how they feel, that's always going to be pathos, using emotion here. So while I am doing that, I make sure to kind of follow it with more of a logical appeal, right? Or using what's called logos. So again, I'm giving reasons why I think, despite how we all feel, pushing schools to open prematurely is not going to speed up that process of getting back to normal. It's actually going to set us back. And as my proof, I include this study that was done, right? Again, the New York Times, while it's not an academic source per se, it's pretty well respected source. Again, this actual study that I just cited here just came out in the last day or so, the results of it. But yeah, giving these sort of statistics, results of this study, that's giving logical support to my argument, right? Again, in the beginning and the end of this paragraph, I'm, making my claims and making it clear that I don't think that schools should reopen in the fall. And again, I don't know if I necessarily believe this whole position that I've created or not, but again, I think that you have to be careful when you're using emotion. If you have a really good example from your personal experience or something that you've heard about, or you're trying to relate to your audience in some way, then that emotion can for sure be effective. But, I wouldn't go a whole paragraph like I did in the example above, where it's purely you trying to push the audience into feeling a certain way, right? So keep this in mind as you're working on your argument, but the bottom line is that probably any argument is going to be best if you're using multiple strategies at once rather than just one. So while logic is always good to use, maybe try to incorporate some other strategies as well, because the more levels that you can be persuasive on, the more likely it is that your audience is going to respect and validate your position. Okay. Good luck.